Welcome everybody. Today we've got another great webinar for you, Practical Guide to Revenue Resilience for SMEs. And we have with us two fine gentlemen. So we've got Alex, founder and CEO of Strategizer, and Michael Wilkins as well, entrepreneur and investor, and I think longtime friend of Strategizer and Alex. Today we've got a bit of a different setup for our agenda. We're going to start with Alex. He'll talk about some innovation guidance, and then hand it over to Michael, who's going to talk about revenue resilience. And then I'm going to spend a bit of time interviewing Michael.
I want to frame kind of where I saw the value of this concept that Michael came up with. And the first time I saw it was actually in the Swiss mountains. So this is a picture from Zermatt. I don't know who of you has already been in beautiful Zermatt. Wonderful with Toblerone Mountain, the Cervin, the Matterhorn. So he made this simple drawing and it just hit me. It's so simple that it's beautiful. So when you kind of look at it, you think, oh my God, that's really simple. Like, how can that be a strong concept? And that's exactly the beauty of it. So even, long-term consultants and people who've been in valuation and M&A and VC, I think you have some stories to tell there, Michael, like this. So what we're going to look at, I'm going to leave the concept to Michael, but I want to show kind of where revenue resilience fits in as a framing before Michael kind of explains what it is. What it made me realize, it's a very simple way to give some guidance to innovate, to become a resilient company in terms of strong, resilient revenues. But I'll start with guidance in general first. So it's a concept we came up with in the Invincible Company where we say, okay, you have a portfolio of existing businesses, your exploit portfolio, and you have a portfolio of innovation projects. We call this the Explore portfolio. Now, rather than if you're a CEO or leading an organization, you're the board of a company, rather than just saying go ahead and innovate, you want to give it a little bit of framing. So often there's some guidance around finance. We say we need to grow 10%. Okay, fine, good. But you also want a little bit more, maybe in the terms of where to play, Roger Martin, in which arenas do you want to play? And what kind of strategic resources do we need to do this? So this is general guidance where we believe we need to play. How are we going to improve our existing portfolio? How are we going to create an innovation portfolio? And the actions there are improving what you have, acquiring, divesting, getting rid of some of your businesses, and then really innovating. Where are we going to explore? Which businesses that we're exploring are we going to pivot? Some of them you're going to kill. We call that retire. And some of them are going to make it from exploration here, transfer up to here. But again, to give it some guidance, I'm going to give you two very quick examples before we go into revenue resilience. So one of the examples from the Invincible Company is Unilever, where Paul Polman made this concept of sustainable living, the strategic guidance for the organization, because his point of view is that business and impact can live in harmony, and actually impact can have a very positive impact on business. So the whole company portfolio of existing business innovation was trimmed in that direction. So Unilever said, we're going to put sustainable living at the center of our organization. That was the guidance. So they improved their existing business divisions by focusing on a couple of things there to make sustainable living commonplace. They acquired new businesses that would fit into that guidance, and they would get rid of some businesses that really didn't fit into that strategic innovation guidance or general guidance anymore. So they really trimmed their portfolio, the typical kind of strategic decisions where to play, and they applied that to their innovation portfolio as well. So this is one type of guidance, okay? So that's what they focused on. That's the direction they took, and that's kind of what created their business results. Unilever today, a little bit of a different story. It's interesting to look at where that company is going to go. Actually, generally in the food sector, there's some interesting things going on today. So they had that as strategic guidance up until about 2019 under Paul Polman. An example I like to use a lot, where we're going to look at a slightly more kind of sophisticated guidance in terms of the terminology, is Ping An. They were a traditional insurance and banking conglomerate, and they said, we need to change. The chairman, Peter Ma, hired this lady here, Jessica Tan, who used to be CEO, co-CEO of Ping An. She's now CEO of Sun Life, the insurance company. And back then she said, under the guidance of Peter Ma, we need to take a lot more risk and experiment, so failure is not really stigmatized. And then she, because of the results that she created under this guidance that we'll see, she was ranked as one of the most powerful business women in 2022. Very impressive woman. So the key thing that they did is, one of the pieces of guidance was that they're going to not just stick to the business units that they were in, the business arenas, but that they would allocate 10% of their profits every year to 5 specific arenas. But they didn't just stop there, but that was the first part of guidance. So if we look at this from a portfolio perspective, like I did before, they'd say we'd invest 10% of our income into exploration, and we'd play in 5 arenas. That was the first part of their guidance. The second part of their guidance was to go further and say, we are actually going to explore completely new business models. So a blank check to say, we're not just going to improve with new products and new technological innovations, go to market, digital channels. We're going to actually explore completely new business models, and we're going to transcend industry boundaries. We're going to look at business models that don't fit in a specific box. And they did that by building on 5 major technologies: biometrics, big data, AI, brain, blockchain, and cloud. And that was their innovation guidance. So you can kind of see this was part of the guidance, overall guidance, which led them to do this in the exploit portfolio and to do this in the explore portfolio. So pretty sophisticated. Now, having looked at all of this guidance stuff and seeing Michael's work on resilience, I think it was about a year ago, Michael, right? Maybe 14 months ago. I thought, wow, that is actually pretty powerful. So what we can frame as becoming a more revenue resilient company could actually be a very simple way to guide all of our kind of innovation actions. So rather than thinking about technologies could be a means to an end. Rather than thinking about new products, what if we framed it, a bit differently and said, revenue resilience is the guidance, meaning, if I keep it in very simple terms, our guidance is that we want to create more resilient revenues. We're going to maybe describe and refine a little bit how we do that. And we choose between either growing, or what you're going to see, which is really interesting, I think Michael will end with that, is, well, there are other ways to increase the value of your company, which might not be growth, but simply focusing on the resilience of the revenues without financially growing the revenues, but with more resilient revenues, you actually increase the value of the company without crazy growth. So that is where I started to see the real value of how you can guide innovation efforts in a very simple and practical way, because I don't know a CEO on the planet that wouldn't get excited about, oh, wow, I can increase the valuation of my company with this very kind of simple revenue resilience guidance. And then that influences the actions you take. How do you improve your business model? How might you acquire some aspects into your business model? How might you divest things that don't really fit this revenue resilience concept? And then on the innovation side, you would start to explore new things, pivot ideas to something more resilient, maybe retire some of the ideas because they won't fit the resilience strategy, and then obviously transfer some of those ideas that really have potential into our core portfolio. So just that little bit of a framing that resilience is not just a powerful concept, but it can actually guide your innovation efforts. So
okay, so I'll talk about this concept of resilience as a strategy. And even more explicit, the revenue resilience. When I coined the phrase resilience as a strategy, it was almost a year and a half, 2 ago. And resilience back then was only used in the context of psychology, that you have psychological resilience as a person. But what happened over the last 18 months have really sparked the interest on resilience. So it's now in a variety of contexts: supply chain resilience, materials resilience, organizational resilience, energy resilience. So it is popping up everywhere. So, but what I'm looking at is predictable revenue. So revenue resilience. And the background is actually part of my work is that I'm on the board of companies, a dozen companies. And one of those companies is called CadDesign Form. It's a company that creates computer generated images of products and locations so that you can save the photo shoot, more or less. And this company has had a very nice trajectory of growth for a long time. But we are sitting in you have to imagine we're sitting in a board meeting. It's October 2023. And the year has been difficult. It has been difficult in the way that we had a first quarter which was really good. Everybody was happy. And then second quarter kind of went really low. And we are like holding it out and say, okay, are we going to keep on our people? Do we have to adjust the organization? Waiting, then adjusting a little bit. And then suddenly we are really busy again and assignments keep coming in. And this is actually the history of the company, that we have these bumps in the roads that either we are really busy or we have nothing to do. So that's one challenge, that we have low predictability on revenue. And that's a very big stress factor in the organization. The other issue we have in October 23 is we're looking into a market now where there's a lot of insecurities. We have all our furniture producers, all our kitchen producers are not looking too good, which means also it's going to be difficult for us to create growth. But still, the CEO is presenting a budget where we actually have growth calculated in. And I challenged that and said, well, the market doesn't look good. Why would we budget for growth? And he says, well, for two reasons. First of all, our costs are increasing, so we have to somehow compensate in order not to already budget with a minus. But on the other hand, it's also because we don't want a wasted year. We don't want a year where we created nothing. We created no value for the shareholders. So in order to do that, we need growth. And it burst out of me, well, revenue growth is not the only way to create value. And then the room went quiet. And somebody said, well, could you please explain? And I tried to explain how some revenue is better than other revenue. That revenue that is predictable has higher value, and that somehow goes into the valuation of the company. And I was forced to make this very explicit in some discussions over a few months. But what really made it explicit is I had a dialogue with a journalist from a newspaper called Berlingske Tidende in Denmark, and wrote an article about this list they have. It's a list they call the Gold 1000 list, so the biggest companies in Denmark. And I told him, actually, I think it's a nice list of the biggest companies, but the title is wrong, because gold signifies that it has something to do with value. And number one company on the list is Maersk. It has a revenue of 350 billion Danish, so it's a relatively big company. Many of you probably know it, a shipping company. And then number 7 on the list is Novo Nordisk, known for Wegovy, but also especially for diabetes medicine. And those are the revenues in 2023. But if you look at the value of the companies, the market value of Maersk in 2023 was 196 billion. Whereas the revenue for Novo Nordisk, I don't know if any of you follow the market, but it was almost 4,000 billions. So we have a company which is not half size, but close, but still it has a market value which is 20 times higher. And the reason for this is the resilience in revenue. So if you look at Maersk, they are doing the budgeting in October and November like we were doing, and they're looking into the coming year. They have a lot of framework agreements, but they still have to go out there and sell every shipping order, 350 billion worth. They have to go out and create that business every year. They don't start from scratch because they have size, they have relationships, but they don't have a lot of fixed revenue where you have fixed agreements. Whereas if you look at Novo Nordisk, people using their medicine for diabetes, when they have something that works for them, they will keep using it for the rest of their lives. So it's very predictable revenue. Also, when they work with governments on long contracts, it's 10, 15, 20 years. Of course, they know already what's going to happen in the next year. So you have two very different perspectives on resilience. Where one is where you more or less start over every year, and the other one is where you actually go into the next year knowing already that you have 60 or 80% of the revenue in the bag. So everything you do is building on top of that. And that's actually the essence of it, that not all revenue is worth the same. And at CadDesign, they really bought that idea. So let's say, okay, they said, okay, let's try to build a strategy around resilience. So let's go in and say our strategic direction for the coming year is that we have to create a more resilient companies. And the first thing we did was to split the revenue, and these are actual figures for 2023, into 3 categories. The first one is what we call fixed revenue. It's committed revenue. It's on licenses, prepaid. We have retainers, we have upfront payments. So we are 100% or 99% sure that this revenue will come in the coming year. Then we have the next category of revenue, we call it predictable revenue. That's where we have we don't have formal commitments, but we have insights, we have forecasts, we have very close relationship. We might even have a history of working together. So we say we are 80% sure that this revenue is going to come. And then we have the remainder, which is variable revenue that we have to go out and actively sell, either to existing customers or to new customers. And this is also the tough one because we really have to spend a lot of energy on this revenue. Okay, so why does this matter? It matters because not revenue is worth the same. And the way we look at it is if you're going to sell a company, the first thing that the auditors will do is actually split your revenue into these different boxes. If not exactly with these definitions, something very, very close. And what you'll find is that the value they allocate to the fixed revenue is much higher. So if you take the profit of the fixed revenue, they probably allocate a multiple. We call it a multiple. So you take the profit, the EBITDA, and you say that times a multiple of 20. And if you take the predictable revenue, they'll allocate a multiple at about 10 to this. And if you take the variable revenue, they'll allocate a multiple of 1 to 3, which means that when you're selling the company, the value of the company depends very much on how much of your revenue is in each of these boxes. Now, these multiples, they can vary a little bit depending on industry, but they also vary over time. But what is quite stable is actually the relationship between them. And that means, in essence, that to take revenue from the variable and get it into the box of predictable or fixed is a better deal than it is to actually add additional variable revenue. And I think that's a surprise to a lot of people because we are so top line fixed. If I look back over my 20 years of doing strategy development, I think 95% of the processes that I've facilitated are about revenue growth, in essence, more focus on that. So if we look at what actually happened, we created a strategy with focus on resilience. We managed to increase the fixed revenue from 2% to 18%, the predictable revenue from 39 to 63 in 1 year. And I think that's actually pretty amazing. And what we did is we offered some of our clients a deal where they got on a retainer and they paid up front, or they paid over the year in a payment plan. In turn, we would guarantee them that they had the crew they wanted to work with. We'll allocate some resources to them already from the beginning of the year. We would also digitalize some of the processes so that they get more value for their money. And we'll convert some of our internal tools to software that we would sell on a license that was prepaid. On the inside, we started making framework agreements, having status meetings with clients so we could more foresee what was going to happen within the next quarter. So getting closer to the customer in general. And what does that mean to make that change? I've done the math here. but just this is an academic valuation, but the valuation of the company in this model increases by 72% in 1 year. So the value of the company increases by 72% in 1 year. To do that by growth would take much, much longer. So I think makes it very obvious that this is a very good move to make if you are preparing your company for sale, for example, is that you really have focus on getting these numbers right, getting the agreements in place, because that's something you can do relatively quickly. And it was a big learning and very inspiring for the company. So now we have a budget for 2025. And the budget for 2025, our ambition is to increase the fixed part from 18 to 31 and just maintain the predictable part, and accepting that the last 20% is not going to be, it's coming either from new sales or from something that we didn't know at the beginning of the year. But one thing that is also happening in 25 is that we actually have a growth budget again. And one of the reasons for that is that the first 80% is actually pretty safe already. So we can start thinking about growing even in a difficult market because you're building on top. So that's one of the big learnings. Another big learning is that revenue resilience is a win-win. It's not only a win for the owners, the people who own the company, but it's also a win for the employees, because it's a better environment to work in. You have more predictability. You don't have the stress of revenues going up and down and having to adjust the organization all the time. And the third win is, of course, it has to be a win for the customers, because if it's not a win for the customer, it's not going to work. So the customers have to see the value in creating this commitment. Otherwise, it's a forced monopoly, and nobody wants to be in that. So we have to create offerings, value propositions, where the customer can see how they benefit from committing to this company. Just a slide to show you, this is a transaction of a company we sold in June last year. And one of the big learnings here is, here we split it into 4 categories. But one of the big learning is that predictability is high on the fixed revenue. Profitability, scalability is also high, because it's easier to scale something which is predictable, and it's easier to automate it. But I think what's a bit of a surprise is how much more profitable fixed revenue is, because people generally think you give a lot of discounts in order to get that predictability. What you forget is that if it's really predictable, you can really plan it well, you can execute it well, and it's much more profitable. And I've compared it to other engineering companies that I work with, software companies, and it's not unusual to see that maybe the fixed revenue account for about 25% of the revenue in total in the company. But if you look at the profits, a lot of times up to 95% of the profit come from fixed revenue. We see that especially in the wind turbine industry in Denmark, that they're not making a lot of money on selling wind turbines, but they're making a lot of money on the service afterwards. And I think that's a good learning. Like Alex said earlier, for me, it's a choice of strategic direction. You can choose to go big, like Maersk. It's a good strategy because there's also comfort in size. There's also risk reduction in being big. So it does make sense. Or you can choose to go like CadDesign Form, that you go for predictability. But of course, the best is if you can combine the two. And that's what Novo Nordisk has managed to do. And if you look at Maersk, they are trying to do the same now. They are coming up with concepts where they include warehousing, where you commit yourself to that. They're buying ports where you commit on a longer contracts and so on and so forth. So I think that a lot of people are realizing that predictable revenue has a big impact. And CadDesign Form are now seeing that it's easier to grow now that they have a strong base of predictable revenue. So how do you come up with the ideas for revenue resilience? So we have created a tool, an assessment tool, very much inspired by the work done already by Alex and the team on 9 questions. We have only 7 questions, so but we have this assessment tool where we have found what are the characteristics of companies with high resilience, like customer retention, prepayment, long contracts, co-development, so on and so forth. And then you rate your company on a scale from 1 to 10. And you can look at that rating and say, okay, where could I actually improve quite easily? And that's a good ideation, or what do you call it, kickstart spark for ideation. Another tool we're using is actually AI, where we add a business model to a platform, and then we ask the AI to evaluate the characteristics we just talked about and give you grades and explain why. And then based on that, you can ask for a rationale for the rating and also advice on how to improve your business model. And then you can just apply it and play with it. And we find that though we as human can be very creative when we gather a large group, if you're a small group and you want to work with this, it's very, very efficient to use AI as input, as a spark for ideation. And these are just an example on how you can ideate on customer retention, on prepayment, and then it adds options. So that's some of the things we're working on. Just to finalize it and tie it back to what Alex was saying about exploit and explore, I think what is really important is differentiating between exploit, where we talk about retainer agreements. It's very low risk. It's easy to do. You go out, you talk to your customers. Do they want to do it or not? What does it take for them to commit? You find a deal, so to speak. But it's, for example, if you want to make service agreements, which is also a very strong resilience tool, then you have to build a service organization. You have to create the value propositions. You have to have a sales force that can actually sell it, and you have to train them. So it's a much larger investment with higher risk. And also you have to find out if customers actually want that or they want to keep service in-house. And then if you go into the explore mode, is one of my favorite examples is Hilti. That's also from the book, The Invincible Company, where you create this, go from a product to a service, and that implicates everything in the business model canvas. It means suddenly you have to sell in a different way. It means you have to deliver. Your value proposition is different. You have to build a service organization. It also means you have to have financial partners that can finance the jump from one business model to the other. So it's very different, where you also have to do the more classic testing of desirability and viability and feasibility. So just to sum up, when should you focus on resilience? If you want to create more predictability, if you have an issue of your organization being either too busy or not having enough, and you have to adjust all the time, I think it makes good sense to focus on resilience. If you're preparing your company for sale, it's a no-brainer. You have to do it because there's so much money to pick up quickly. If you're in a market where the size of the market is either declining or very limited, instead of fighting for the last 2% market share with all the others that are really struggling to win those deals at a low margin, then you should instead focus on resilience and keeping really predictable revenue with your existing clients. Also, I find a lot of companies, they lack resources for growth. They don't have the people, they don't have the capacity, or they don't have the capital to grow in the way they want to. And I find that actually resilience is a good way to get around that, to create value in the company while not having the ability to hire more people. And of course, the last one is if you want to be the next Novo Nordisk and a successful company, that's a good thing to copy. Yeah. So what I've done is I've taken all the content that I created on resilience, all the slides, all the videos, everything I have, and I made it publicly available on resilience as a strategy. And I would encourage you, if this is something you want to work with, to go to the platform, use the tools, see the videos, share it with your colleagues to get started on this journey of resilience.
So the first question, thank you again for your presentation. Lots of really positive comments in the chat here, and a number of questions have come in various ways. So the first one is, what are some of the pitfalls and success stories of organizations that have been using revenue resilience as a strategy?
So if you look at one of the biggest blockers that I've seen is actually, first of all, to develop the value propositions, but mainly to go out and talk to the customers. and to have the salesperson sell in a different way. If you're used to going out there and collecting orders, and you've done that for years, and suddenly you have to do a completely different dialogue where you talk about commitment, you talk about long-term relationships, you're talking about what would it take for you to commit. It's a very different dialogue, and we find that salespeople they find this very difficult. So they need support. They need somebody to take by the hand, maybe a management person in the beginning until they get the confidence. So that's one pitfall. Another pitfall is, of course, that sometimes resilience is a strategy can be a strain on liquidity, because when you do service as a service, sometimes you only get the revenue back in over like 3 or 4 years, whereas before you would get it immediately if you sell product. So that's a pitfall that you have to be aware of, that you actually have the financing to do this. And then, of course, another pitfall is that people think it moves slow in the beginning. But the thing about it is, if it's recurring, it comes back, then accelerates really, really quickly. So you have to have that patience in the beginning to see the small numbers until it really starts growing exponentially. So those are some of the things that I see.
Brilliant. And it that patience and waiting for things is much, very similar to what happens when you're looking at disruptive innovation as well. It's the same kind of thing, right?
Yeah.
Brilliant. And then the next question is just thinking about the explore exploit continuum that we talk about at Strategizer. Where do you think that revenue resilience works best?
What I've done until now is 80% explore, because I mean that's where the money is. It's really low-hanging fruits to do that. You have the business, you have the relationship, you have the value propositions. A lot of it is just about rethinking the agreements and how you plan and execute the work and the customer commitment. So it's really, really easy. So in my so far, it has been in the exploit side. I think when you go into explore, it's also a longer process. For me, this concept being so explicit about the concept is relatively young, so I don't have a long track record for it. Of course, we've been working with recurring revenue before and doing that transition, but it has been in a different framing, so to speak.
Yeah. Great. So I think exploit, just in case folks were
Sorry. Yeah.
Harris and Alex were on it, backing you up there. Perfect. Great. And then the next question for you is just, what is one small step that you could suggest organizations and folks here in the audience could do to get started with revenue resilience?
So the first step I did myself was actually go out and ask my customers for prepayment. So when I do a consulting job, I book my time and I ask them to pay 50% upfront, even though the engagement is just in 6 or 9 months. And you learn over time that this is actually a good thing, because things don't get postponed. If somebody gets fired from the company, the job is still on. So you have a totally different framing of it. So that's a first and very, very easy step. Another step is that you go to your existing clients where you have a close relationship and you talk about how this would be important for you to have that predictability in your planning and your resources, and how you can deliver better value for them if you have that planning. And this would be a very easy step for them also to understand and create that commitment.
Yeah, brilliant. I've made a note. Great. I think everyone here has. Those are great suggestions. Another one that someone posted earlier was around the question, are resiliency and innovation playing against each other? Or is innovation supporting resilience? Or can you tell us a little bit about that?
I think innovation is leverage. I mean, it is necessary to have the innovation toolbox in order to think resilience, because you have to use the tools to rethink both the exploit business models, but also the explore. You have to use the testing when you do something new. You have to use everything about value proposition design when you have to create new value proposition and test them in the market before. So I think they play along beautifully. I use the exact same toolbox in the processes where I develop these value propositions with clients.
Perfect. I'm
So
gonna
I
just
think actually it should be seen as a guidance, like
Mm,
Alex mentioned in the beginning. So this is just a different type of guidance with a different perspective.
yeah, great. Alex, anything to add there? No, good. All right, perfect.
So one question that I get a lot that maybe we should touch on is a lot of people tell me, well, why all this talk about valuation if I don't want to sell my company?
Yes.
And I think it's easy to understand that, important to understand that the people buying companies, they're not stupid. And the
Mhm.
reason they want to pay more for a company with high resilience is because over time it will generate higher profits. And even if you want to keep the company, that upside belongs to yourself. So you still have an interest in creating resilience as soon as possible and creating that value for yourself instead. So this is not only for companies being sold, it's actually a very good idea for long-term owners to do this transition.
Perfect. Great. Another question for you is why would customers be interested in long-term commitment? Isn't it only a good thing for you?
It's a very good question, and I get surprised every time we have the dialogue because customers they see the value for themselves. They see, okay, I get the team I want. I get more efficiency in the delivery because they can plan it better and digitize it. Sometimes it also means, for example, for CadDesign Form, that some customers they can actually say, okay, this budget is allocated. You can't take my budget because it's already allocated. So that might also be internal reasons. But I find there's a lot of business reasons why predictability in supply is valuable for companies, especially, of course, if you are in areas of business where it can be difficult to find the best people and the right suppliers and very efficiently.
Perfect.
But it has to be a win-win because if it's not a win-win, it's not going to work.
I think that's a really good point.
Yeah.
Right. Value for the customer and value for you. Um, Another one, why is just one of the basics, but why is profitability higher on fixed revenue than variable revenue? Can you explain that?
It's because you can simply plan it better. If you know already a year in advance that this is the assignments that are coming in, these are the things you have to do. You can optimize your processes, you can digitize, you can use AI to help you deliver simply better planning. It makes a huge difference.